Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Parallel Magic, the science fiction and fantasy book show. I'm Kate M. Colby, joined as always by my friend and fellow author, Jonas Lee. And today we'll be discussing Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. How's it going today, Jonas?
It's going well. It is springtime. Everything is rainy out here, which is actually something I like. But it also is rainy and I have dogs, so that sucks.
So lots of muddy footprints, huh?
Every time he goes outside. Sure enough. But yeah, I am excited. I know we're actually, people who are listening to this is probably wondering when we're releasing an episode because we are about a week behind at this point. I'm pretty sure that's right. And that's my fault because I was lazy, and we'll get into that. But I'm good. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's not too rainy out here in California. We've passed the rainy season and it's decided to be summery all of a sudden. So I'm definitely down for that. But yeah, I've been really busy as well with work trips and my husband's school and everything. So I am so ready to sit down and relax with a drink and a good book.
Absolutely. And one thing that I was always unclear about with this book, it's Interview with the Vampire, not a vampire. And I've got it wrong so many times in my life.
Yeah, I think I
Interview
just
with a Vampire.
Too.
And I missed the part of it. And just go, yeah. But yeah, and I'm going to give a full disclosure on this before we get started. I got most of the way through this book, and it has really nothing to do with Anne Rice's writing or the premise of the story. And we'll get into little bits of that here and there, and I don't want to spoil anything quite yet, but I'm just giving everybody a preface.
Fair enough. So what are you drinking today?
I was going to be, wickedly clever and do like a Bloody Mary or something, and then I realized how much crap you need to mix a drink like that together, and I just went, no. So I grabbed the nearest thing in my refrigerator, which was this new Bud Light Orange. It's like the new summer drink, I guess.
Nice.
So I'm gonna say it's a blood orange though. That way I stick to thematics.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I love it.
What about you? What are you drinking today?
Well, I am also going to stretch the imagination to get on theme. So in my fridge opened, there was a bottle of Vinho Verde, and that's a Portuguese white wine. And basically, they make it to be drunk when it's still really young and fresh. So, I'm saying, much like the vampires got more satisfaction out of their lives and their immortality when they were still young, so too do we get more satisfaction out of Vinho Verde when it is young.
Way to stretch that thin.
Those are my imaginative acrobatics for the day.
That's how we reason and rationale these things. Well, great. We are both getting ready for this episode. I'm going to read the traditional Goodreads blurb that is out there, just in case anybody has never heard of or know the preface of Interview with the Vampire. But it goes something like this. This is the story of Louis. It is Louis, right? I wasn't saying Louis for the whole time.
No, it's Louis.
Okay. This is the story of Louis, as told in his own words, of his journey through mortal and immortal life. Louis recounts how he became a vampire at the hands of the radiant and sinister Lestat, and how he became indoctrinated unwillingly into the vampire way of life. His story ebbs and flows through the streets of New Orleans, defining crucial moments such as his discovery of the exquisite lost young child Claudia, wanting not to hurt but to comfort her with the last breaths of humanity he has inside. Yet he makes Claudia a vampire, trapping her womanly passion, will, and intelligence inside the body of a small child. Louis and Claudia form a seemingly unbreakable alliance and even settle down for a while in the opulent French Quarter. Louis remembers Claudia's struggle to understand herself and the hatred they both have for Lestat that sends them halfway across the world to seek others of their kind. Louis and Claudia are desperate to find somewhere they belong, to find others who understand, and someone who knows what and why they are. Louis and Claudia travel Europe, eventually coming to Paris, or Paris if you really want, and the ragingly successful Théâtre des Vampires. I don't know French. Theater
It's
of
a vampire
Vampires.
theater.
Yeah. Pretending to be mortals, pretending to be vampires. Here they meet the magnetic and ethereal Armand, who brings them into a whole society of vampires, but Louis and Claudia find that finding others like themselves provides no easy answers and in fact presents dangers they scarcely imagined. Whew! That was a lengthy one.
That was, and it kind of gives a lot of the plot away.
It really did. I mean, you can't,
That was surprising.
You're like, whoop, and now you don't need to read it. But, okay. I gave my disclosure, so let's let you get into the beginning of the book. What did you think of the premise? I mean, you read or watched first?
I watched first. So yeah, my kind of disclaimer on this one is that I love the movie. It's one of the first vampire movies I think I ever saw, and I've been a fan of it my whole life, as long as I can remember. Mm-hmm. So that definitely influenced the way I approached the book. The way I approached the book. See, I'm so excited. I'm like tripping over my words.
Right.
But yeah, so the thing that caught me off guard with the book right from the beginning, if we want to start there, was the style is actually kind of weird when you first start reading it, like the writing style, because the narrator is describing the interview process, like the boy. Well, I'm sure he's a full-fledged man, but compared to Louis, he's a boy. Right. Sitting down and interviewing Louis about his experience, and you never get a name for him, so he's a really easy character to put yourself in his place. And so it took me a couple pages to like orient into it, because the whole time Louis is telling his story, it really is just him saying it. Like, it's not like there's a chapter break and then Rice takes you back in time and does a traditional narrative style. Like, the whole thing is Louis' voice. So at first I was like, well, shit, this is going to be really boring. He's just going to talk at me and, show, don't tell. He's just going to tell me the whole time. But the way she wrote the dialogue and, like, his long monologues was just so beautiful and descriptive that, like, you kept that sense of his voice the whole time, but yet it still felt as immersive as reading a traditionally written novel, I thought.
Yeah, it definitely, for me, I mean, it reminded me that, oh yeah, this book was written in the 70s, back when, these kinds of formats of writing were very popular, just really large blocky chunks of narration or description and things like that. And the fact that it was an interview style format, it made me go, oh God, is this what this whole book is going to be like? Because this is where I'm going to start pulling away. But yeah, you're right. Her writing is very poetic in a sense, and because of that, it lulls you into seeing the setting through that interview process. So I completely agree with you on that. It threw me off, but it didn't throw me off enough to make me go, I can't keep reading it.
Yeah. Well, in looking at it as a writer, too, I'm kind of like, oh, damn, that's a really cool technique and everything. But it's just one of those techniques where you know that if someone tried to do it now, they would be written off as being cheesy or trying too hard or whatever. Like, yep. For whatever reason, whether it was the time period or the power of the story or her characters or her individual writing, it really works, and I don't think it's something that could be easily replicated.
Yeah. A lot of older style writing, I mean, you can kind of pick up on it here and there, I think. I think now you really have to start breaking things up into smaller paragraphs for people because of that attention span and that need to, I need to know what people are thinking, feeling, saying, doing constantly. And if my brain is on a just continuous, like, oh my God, that's 4 pages with no separation of paragraph, I'm going to be bored. but yeah, she and I can't remember how many real vampire-ish stories are out there, and I'm sure people might know that, but I mean, when I think back to the 70s and vampire stories, I'm thinking of things like, I mean, I Am Legend, Salem's Lot, and Interview with the Vampire. Those are the three that I can only think of, and then everything after that is kind of like, oh, look at the explosion of vampires that just happened.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and for that matter, I really like her version of vampires. Because, every author kind of puts their own twist. Some people make them sparkle, for instance, as we all know.
We all know what we're talking about here.
But I like hers because they're beautiful, but they're so predatory. It's like they really, I feel, have a lot in common with, like, a gorgeous lioness out in the savannah, like, getting ready to take down a gazelle. Like, that's how I kind of envision her vampires.
Like, ooh, look how pretty it is. Oh, shit. And then all of a sudden, death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I like that like Louis retains his compassion for humanity, but I like even more that most of the other vampires don't. They're like, yeah, bitch, they're a food source, so why are you interested in them?
Right. And I think for looking into that, I don't know if that's really a big spoiler. I mean, the way that Louis was brought into becoming a vampire probably shaped a lot of how he views vampires and humanity in that sense. That's not spoiling anything, though, really, is it?
No, I don't think so. It happened so early on in the book.
Yeah.
And I imagine a lot of our listeners will have seen the movie, so.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, have you heard anything about this book of hers? This was her inaugural book, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's the first book she ever wrote, but it's the first in the Vampire Chronicles.
Right. Okay, then.
Yeah, so she wrote this one first, and then she went back in time and wrote origin stories for Lestat and Armand. And I'm not sure what other books are in the series, but I know there's at least those three.
Yeah, I think that when I looked, there was actually like closer to 7 or 8 of them in the Vampire
Chronicles. I'm sure. Yeah.
But I mean, you have Queen of the Damned, and I think there's one called the Body.
The
Body Thief is one. And there's one about Lestat, and I think there's one about Lestat and not Aquarius, but what's the underground water city?
Atlantis?
Atlantis. Jeez, thank you.
Really?
Yeah. And that's where I went, okay, that's really stretching it, but I'm interested.
I would say that feels like jumping the shark a little bit to me, but...
Okay, now imagine this. Lestat and Aquaman. What the hell's going on?
Well, I'm sure if people out there are thinking of it as like Jason Momoa and Tom Cruise, they might sign up for that.
They might. I mean, they might just be like, yep, here's my money. I'll see it. It's fine. I'm trying to think of what else, because I don't want to spoil too much in the book versus movie, because then that kind of spoils if you ever wanted to read the book or watch the movie if you've never watched the movie, I guess. But yeah, I mean, there are various differences throughout, because I'm like you, I watched the movie first. I watched it multiple times. So going into that, I think that's what also kind of shaped a little bit of my need to not push through the book and finish the book, because there's a lot of very, very, very good similarities between book and movie, which I think they did really well. And then there's some differences that really didn't play too much into the movie itself. So we can get into that here in a little bit. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add, though, before we start getting into spoilerish country?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think the writing style is really fantastic and unique, very beautifully descriptive. I love this version of vampires and the larger questions it raises about, what makes us human, what about humanity is admirable, and what about it could we perhaps shed. And yeah, it's one of those books that always makes you question, like, what would I do with immortality and all those typical vampire themes. So
yeah, I think that's one good thing that I think that's why the vampire genre hasn't died yet either, is because it always teases you with that internal question of what would I do if I could live forever? But what if I could live forever, but the price was having to, kill and drink people, really? Like, could you live with yourself with that? Would you? And then what would you do with it? So, That's what I always enjoy about vampire movies and books. You just kind of see different aspects of the human condition, I guess, and how it's displayed in otherworldly beings now.
Yeah, and I think as long as we are mortal and science doesn't figure out how to fix that or Judgment Day doesn't come or whatever you want to say,
Right.
I think vampires and kind of on the other end of the spectrum, zombies are always going to be two monsters that haunt us because they're the answers to questions we don't have, and they're the solutions to problems we can't solve. So,
Yeah, and I guess I always knew it was there, but I never really saw the other side of the coin. How vampires are one side basically, and zombies are the other. I mean, zombies are the undead that are always ugly and everybody wants to kill.
yeah.
Vampires are the pretty ones that are violent, but you always wish you could be. So, very very interesting dynamic. We'll have to get into that someday.
Yeah, we're getting real deep here.
Getting real philosophical on this.
It's
That's
the
what happens when you
booze.
start. Yeah, when you start boozing it up, it's just like, yep, here comes all the philosophical questions. Okay, well, from this point on, we're just going to break down different things that
Wait,
we've. Oh, wait, what?
shot ratings
Oh, shot rating.
before everybody leaves to avoid spoilers.
Right. Shots. Okay. Well, like I said, I got pretty much about 60% through the book. And then after that point, I mean, I was just running short of time and I didn't want to put this off for another week and then, procrastinate another week. So that in conjunction with some of the things I looked at online in conjunction with the movie that I saw, that's where I come up with my rating. So if you like it, great. If you don't like it, I totally understand because I didn't 100% finish it. But I give this one, as the book itself, because I am comparing it to the movie, and I know that's kind of crappy of me, but, I mean, if you read the book and then somebody rewrote that book, I mean, you'd kind of give that new book the same rating too. But I gave it a 6 out of 10, so I'm really sorry for any Anne Rice fans out there. And it has nothing to do with her writing. It had to do more with the pacing and how it didn't draw me in like other books have that I've given a higher rating to. That's essentially it.
That's fair. Well, I think first I want to offer a little disclaimer here that, like, Jonas is being really hard on himself, but the reason he's behind on his reading is that he's been being a good dad and, like, coaching softball and all that kinds of parenting stuff. So
Dang
let's not look too harshly on him. But for my rating, I will give it an 8 out of 10 with the caveat that, like, I'd probably give the movie a 10 out of 10 because I love the movie so much.
Yeah.
I think what holds me back from those last two shot ratings is kind of like Jonas was saying, although I really enjoyed the writing style, it was slow at times. It was a little, I don't want to say overkill on description, but there were some times where the description got a little heavy and kind of distracted from the plot. That and, I don't know, I think there were more questions I personally wanted answered about vampires and in this world, and I understand that I can't always get what I want, and that some questions need to be withheld for book series or just because the characters can't reasonably know it, but I just wanted more, and I felt like, there wasn't as much there as I would like sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Well, there you go. so I mean, we got an average 7 out of 10. That's not bad.
That's not bad at all.
That's not bad, especially for a book that's 42 years old.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's a great thing, too, is even though the technology is a little outdated, because, like, the interviewer's using a cassette tape instead of, like, recording Louis on his podcast,
Absolutely.
It's still, the story is still completely relatable in every possible way. So.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, now we'll get into the part where we get into maybe a little bit of spoilers if you haven't seen or read either or both, whatever you might want to call it. So, I mean, we'll probably compare and contrast a little bit between book and movie at this point because, well, the movie is, I mean, it's film icon, or it's a film iconic movie as far as vampires go. I think it's rated as one of the top 10 of all time. So, I mean, we have to get into it a little bit. But we'll also go into little parts of the story of what's different, and then we will hopefully come to a fabulous conclusion, or whatever. We'll figure something out by the end.
See where the booze takes us.
See where the booze takes us. All right, so major differences that I came across right away was, I think I was confused because I was trying to remember the movie, but I'm like, did Lestat have a father in the movie? And then I realized, no, he didn't have a dad. And that was one of the main things. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And between that and he actually had a family, not a wife, or a wife and kid, if I remember right. And
right, yeah, it was, Louis had a sister. Well, he had sisters and his mom instead of...
And his brother was the one that died.
His brother died,
and nobody could figure out if he killed himself or if he just fell or what was going on, but they kind of blamed Louis a little bit because he was in the room or on the floor that his brother was. That part was kind of unclear to me, and I kind of just skimmed a little bit more past it because I was more confused, because I'm thinking movie. When I picture these vampires, I'm picturing the people from the movie, and even when I got to the point where Armand was in there, and I just kind of went, oh, that's way different. That's way different than what I was picturing.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the movie is a really honest adaptation of the book, except it just leaves quite a bit out, which, most movies do, because you just don't have a reasonable time frame to include all the detail. So I kind of looked at the book of an expanded version of the movie, because all the major plot points lined up, but it was just, there was a lot of stuff in between that we didn't get to see in the movie. Like, for example, Louis and Claudia go to Transylvania before they go to Paris, which I thought was an excellent addition. It's like, yes, of course, you would go to the place that is rumored to be the origin of vampires, and you would look there first. And I love that they did that, and they found these original vampires that were really savage and didn't have any of their humanity or intellectual capacity left. And I thought that was a really interesting twist.
They're like zombie vampires.
Yeah, pretty much.
What a weird full circle that made it. Just a really short amount of time. But yeah, there's little things like that I was seeing in there that, clearly books in the long run are going to be better. For me, this was just one of those instances where I preferred the movie over the book, and it has nothing to do with, the visuals of that movie are something to witness. And like you were saying, the main plot points got hit enough where you weren't saying they totally ruined this book by making this movie. No, you just kind of went, oh, I see why they had to do that. Claudia in the book is 5 or 6 years old. You are not going to find a 5 or 6 year old who can speak and articulate the same way that somebody who'd be 60, which is what she was when things started happening. You're not going to have that kind of intelligence, that emotional intelligence level in there. So having to make her a little bit older, which is what Kirsten Dunst was, I think 12, something like that.
I think she was a little younger than that, but yeah, she was old enough that, as an actress, she could fully articulate everything, and
she pulled it off brilliantly, I thought.
Well, and I think too, with Claudia's character, it's this really interesting statement on repressed sexuality in women, and doing that balancing act of I want to be this innocent, sweet girl, but I also have needs and desires, and I'm a woman type thing that I think a lot of women experience over the course of their lives, especially in those formative teenage years for us regular humans. And I think in the book, with her being 5 or 6, you don't really mind those sexual undertones as much because you don't see her in that way. But I think if the actress were 5 or 6 and there was that sexual undertone, it would just be too much. Yeah. It was bad enough with her being 10 or whatever she was.
And there weren't a whole lot of sexual undertones in the movie, though, with her.
No.
That
No,
part was more of the father-daughter-ish roles.
yeah. But I think the movie, or the book, excuse me, was way more sexual, like with everyone. Like there was so much more of a homoerotic relationship with Louis and Armand and Louis and Claudia, and it kind of like flirted with everybody.
And that was one of those other moments where I kind of went, holy, I never really picked up too much. I mean, you kind of pick up on it a little bit. I think with vampires, you kind of, that cautionary discrepancy between what sexuality is starts to fade away, and you're okay with that, and you don't really see it as much as you do with, I mean, just normal people at that point. I mean, I'm talking about early 90s, and even when this came out in the 70s. But I mean, me just reading that, like immediately, you're going, oh, this is very homoerotic. The way that she's pandering this towards that kind of, I mean, you can't really call it a stereotype at that point in time, but that kind of undertone that's constantly there, even when Lestat's like, oh, yeah, there's nowhere for you to sleep, just come in my coffin. Just come in here with me real quick. We'll be fine.
Yeah, and for the time period, like you say, I think that was a very bold, like, forward-thinking choice. Mm-hmm. And I think what felt weird about it to me, and not like in a bad way, just different, was normally we see the sexuality of vampires expressed with humans. Mm-hmm. Whether, like, we are their source of, like, nourishment and they get a thrill from drinking our blood, or, like, we want to sleep with them because they're like this immortal, perfect being, and like we want to get as close to that immortality as possible. So I think seeing the sexuality and like the tension between the vampires was interesting. It's not what you normally see, so it was kind of different and fun to see how those dynamics played out amongst immortals.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, it brings up a really interesting point just with how the vampire culture in all of literature tends to get played, and that's why people try to deviate from it and break away from it and make, I mean, you make things like, I mean, when Stephen King made Salem's Lot, that wasn't a beautiful vampire, that was a ruthless, vengeful, sadistic killer of a vampire. And when you get into things like Lost Boys, I mean, when we jump over to film, and you go, oh nope, that's the allure of being young and vital forever, and mm-hmm. You play with that notion of immortality, of mortality, of right and wrong, and it always gets summed up and wrapped up in vampire movies, I feel like, more than any other kind. Or vampire culture, I should say.
Yeah. Well, and it's great because vampires can represent so many things. Because, mm-hmm. like, on the one hand, they are immortality and freedom and strength, but on the other hand, they're damned and cursed, and, you know, they have to watch everyone they could possibly be connected to die around them. And, like, they don't get the sun. And I think the sun, it's, like, overlooked because, like, no vampires can be in the sun except for, like, the Twilight bitches with their diamond skin. Yeah, but, like, the sun is literally what creates life on this planet. You know, it feeds the plants, it feeds the animals, we need the vitamin D, all of that.
Well, not only that, but, I mean, I just remember I had to work these very long shifts at my job, and it was over the winter time, and I would go in before the sun came up, and I worked in a basement, mm-hmm. and I would, like, maybe pop upstairs one time a day, and then I would leave, and it would still be dark outside. And you do that for, 5 days a week all of a sudden, and by the end of the week, it does something to your psychology. It just kind of messes with you a little bit. You're like, why am I so just unhappy? And I think that kind of plays into it, that need for sunlight, for life, for attention, for brightness, for everything that you can really wrap up into what the sun is. And then these are a race of being essentially that are denied that privilege. And I don't remember, because I didn't get through that part of the book, I don't think, when Louis is looking at sun for the first time, because he can see motion pictures and whatnot, or if that was just in the movie. I'm not sure which.
I can't remember if he talks about that in the book, but he does make a really big point in the book, like he does in the movie, of, like, watching his final sunrise.
Yeah.
Or like his final sunset, and, like, how that is such an impactful thing, and he realizes it's something he took for granted his entire human life, and now it's just gone.
Yeah. Those are really good points I mean, whether you're reading the book or watching the movie, I think that the whole thing kind of wraps itself up really well. So whether you just do one or the other or both, there's a lot of different things that I picked up on, so I can imagine that more cultured people can probably pick up on as well. But I'm trying to think what was another one that was popping up for me. Oh, with Lestat. Yeah, I mean, when you were referencing differences with vampires and mortality, when you have Louis in one sense, who is, I mean, he's constantly like the emo hero.
Yeah.
He's depressed from the moment before he becomes a vampire, as he's a vampire, and he refuses to turn another person because he doesn't, I don't know if he just doesn't want to feel loss ever again. I mean, after Claudia and Madeline? Is that
Yes.
Right? Madeline, after they're taken and, burnt to a crispy cinder, I'm sure after that point he doesn't want to go through that motion of loving somebody again or feeling connected to somebody again. He just wants to be alone. And then there's Lestat, who just likes to play and mess around and screw with people and sees them as just like a plaything, a food source, a whatnot. And you have the far extreme, which is those Transylvanian vampires who will just eat anybody and anything and don't care about anything, probably not even themselves. So you see this very interesting progression of stages, I guess.
Yeah, and I think Armand is really interesting in the book because he is the oldest vampire that he knows, or that, like, anyone in the book knows. And he started out like Lestat, but then he's become so disconnected from humanity and the modern world that, like, when he meets Louis, he, like, feels like he has a chance again to be connected and, like, kind of get some of Lestat's fervor for life back. And so I think it's really interesting because in the book, after Claudia and Madeline are killed, Louis and Armand run off together and go back to New Orleans. And I think it's so interesting how, like, Armand was able to find meaning in Louis again and, like, rekindle his zest for life. But Louis still was like, yeah, I've had a good time with you, but bye, bitch, I'm bored. Like, yeah, I can't, I'm never going to be happy again, so I'm just going to leave now.
Well, and I'm pretty sure from that point, too, when you tie a traumatic event to somebody that you just met, that person becomes that traumatic event that you carry around with you. So,
yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna overlook that, unfortunately. And then one of the things that I thought was interesting when I was looking into it was that Lestat was actually the one in charge of burning Claudia and Madeline to death. And in the movie, that's not the case. In the movie, it was just like they decided that, yep, she was too young, you shouldn't have done that, and now we're going to kill her. Yeah. But no, it wasn't. It was a grand mastermind. An aha.
Yeah, I like that. I like that Lestat got to come back and be the villain and kind of get his vengeance.
Yeah, I mean, it really was vengeance. It wasn't like... I mean, I can't really tell if it was just what Claudia did. I can see her anger and why she probably was upset and angry and wanted to do it. But then, fair play turnaround. So, I mean, you try and kill me? Well, that's what I'm going to do. Well, and then she tried to kill him twice, really. She poisoned him, slit his throat, and then they burned the house down that he was in. Somehow he made it out. It's like a cockroach.
Yeah. Well, and I think for Lestat, too, he wanted Louis to himself, and he resented the fact that, like, Louis never appreciated the gift of immortality. But then, like, when Claudia came along, Louis's whole life, like, and all of his focus was on Claudia. And Lestat, I think he cared for Louis in a weird way, but he also wanted Louis to revere him the way that Louis seemed to worship Claudia. Yeah. So I think he wanted her out of the picture so that he could have Louis to himself again and they could kind of go back to the good old days. But what he couldn't seem to grasp was that, like, the good old days they didn't really exist, and they're never coming back.
Yep. It was just a figment of your imagination. Yeah, and I think Lestat was using Claudia as just. It's kind of funny when I think about it. It's like that. I shouldn't say funny. It reminds me of like when two parents divorce but they stay together for the kid,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted to input that kid so that Louis would stay, and
Yeah,
that's
that's
kind of
absolutely.
what happened until your kid decides to murder you.
Yeah, I always love that. I love that even though she's trapped in a child's body, she was such an adult and so driven, and she manipulated the hell out of the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, even though she kind of gets fridged and ends up dying, like, to spur Louis' development, I feel like she at least is a really strong character while
Yeah,
she's there.
and I like this time period where killing off a pretty much a main character in a book wasn't done just for the sake of drama. It was done for the sake of an actual plot development, which
Hmm.
I think there's too many people that are just like, well, I'm done with this character, time to kill it. And I'm probably guilty of that somewhere in there too. Just like,
It's
oh,
fun
there's
to
too
kill
many characters,
characters.
I better kill one. But no, I mean, in older books and older literature, that's actually stood the test of time, like Anne Rice's books have. I mean, she did things with purpose, at least at first. I can't speak to anything after this book, but at least with this book, it had purpose. It had good motivation behind it, and a good why. Why would you do that? Like, oh, this is why. Oh, well, that makes sense then.
Hmm. One thing that I will say, as we're kind of moving towards the end here,
Mm-hmm.
is I did want to comment on the end of the book
Okay.
versus the end of the movie. And I'm sorry guys, but I just have to.
No, go ahead.
So at the end of the book, Louis ends up finding Lestat where he is in New Orleans. And, they kind of have a conversation, and Lestat's like, oh, come back, come back. And Louis is like, no, I'm leaving. Nice to see you, but I'm gone.
Right.
And then, if I'm remembering correctly, because it has been a little while since I read this, the interviewer, like, goes in search of Lestat. Because Louis won't turn him, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go find this guy, because this guy seems, like, crazy and interesting.
Yep, that's what I read. I should say.
Yeah. Whereas in the movie, Lestat, like, shows up and, you know, looks at the interviewer and is like, I'm going to give you the choice that nobody gave me,
Mm-hmm.
basically saying that he's going to turn the interviewer, and the interviewer realizes, like, oh shit, maybe I didn't want this, but
Yeah.
now I'm trapped and I'm going to be in Louis' shoes. And I think the book's ending is better as far as setting up possible sequels, because the interviewer could go on and you could kind of replicate the format of this book if you wanted. I'm not sure if Rice does that.
From what
Um,
I from what I read, because I don't think it explains at the end of the book, but you're right. He does go off in search of Lestat, but he actually comes to find Armand instead, and Armand's
okay.
the one who kind of takes him under his wing, and eventually, I think like another book down the road, turns him out of some sort of self-preservation thing. I don't know, or something like that. But
Gotcha. Okay. So, but I like the movie's ending better because I think it's more dramatic and I think it makes a better statement. Because it really says, like, we might think we want immortality, but if we were really staring down the barrel of that gun,
mm-hmm.
it might not be as appealing as we thought. And, like, there are so many more consequences that go with it that you don't think about.
Yeah, and I think in the movie, Louis basically threatens him, says, "Is this what you want? Is you want to become a killer like me?" and scares him out of the room.
Yes,
Whereas
yeah.
opposed, I think in the book, he actually like drains him until he passes out. When he wakes up, then he starts replaying tapes and tries to
Hmm.
find. Yeah. So no, I think you're dead on, hammer to nail there.
Yeah. I like me some themes. I'm
Themes
sure
are
everybody's
good.
picked up on that by now.
Themes are good. Well, um, clearly we both like the movie. We both like vampire genre out there, save for maybe a couple of books that exist in the world that sparkle. But overall, great book. I mean, she's led a great career towards. I think it's like 7 or 8 different, just in the Vampire Chronicles and whatever else. I think there's like witch books that she does as well that kind of intertwine with her Vampire Chronicles. themes. But by all means, go out, check out Anne Rice, and if you've read it, review it. I mean, I know she's super duper famous and everybody knows who Anne Rice is, but I'm sure she'd still appreciate a review every now and then, even if it's just to tell people that you know what you thought about it. So that's my piece. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, she also has a really great Facebook page. So, like, she'll post these kind of long but, like, really inspiring messages every now and then, especially for writers and creative types. So if you are one of those, I would recommend following her on Facebook as well, because she seems to be relatively active and pretty uplifting, despite the dark subject matter of her books.
True. And speaking of following on Facebook, people should follow us on Facebook, I think.
Yeah, they absolutely should.
And not only that, we're also on the Twitter, and we're also on the Instagram.
And the Goodreads.
And the Goodreads. We have a group out there. You can join our little book club. Give us suggestions about what we want to read next, and follow along. Let us know how full of it we are, or how on the nail we are.
Yes, and those links are always in the show notes every single time. So no matter where you like to hang out on social media, just scroll down, give us a click and a follow.
Absolutely. And pretty much if you type in Parallel Magic in the search field of wherever you're looking for, you'll probably find us. There's not many parallel magics out there, I've found. So we keep it easy, keep it simple for you.
We're just, good people like that.
We are. Good to we're embracing that humanity portion of it all. So, but up until that point, come follow us, and I will just raise my Bud Light Blood Orange and say cheers to you.
Cheers!